The metal shackles cut into 16-year-old Marcus Chen's wrists as the Zephyrian guards dragged him across the crystalline platform. Billions of beings across the galaxy watched through their neural feeds as the human boy stumbled, his legs barely able to support his weight after weeks of torture in the detention facility. The Galactic Council had spared no expense for this execution. The floating execution platform hovered above New Centauri's capital city, its transparent surface offering a perfect view to the crowds below and the countless cameras broadcasting the event across known space. Purple-skinned Zephyrians with their elongated skulls filled the viewing stands, their 4 eyes gleaming with satisfaction. This was their moment of triumph. Commander Vextar, the Zephyrian military leader who had orchestrated the capture, stepped forward to address the galaxy. His translator device crackled to life, converting his guttural language into standard galactic speech. "Citizens of the galaxy," he announced, his voice echoing across the platform. "Today we witness justice for the crimes committed by this human terrorist. Marcus Chen destroyed 3 of our mining stations, killing over 2,000 innocent workers. His species has proven themselves to be nothing more than violent savages who threaten galactic peace." Marcus lifted his head, his brown eyes defiant despite the bruises covering his face. Blood trickled from a cut above his left eyebrow, but his voice rang clear when he spoke. "Those weren't mining stations," he said, his words picked up by the sensitive microphones. "They were slave camps. 2,000 Terran children were being forced to work in those mines. I freed them." The crowd jeered, their alien voices creating a cacophony of hatred. Vextar struck Marcus across the face with the back of his clawed hand, leaving 4 parallel gashes on the boy's cheek. "Lies," the commander hissed. "Your species always lies when faced with justice. But today the galaxy will see what happens to human terrorists." The execution device rose from the platform's center, a sleek column of dark metal topped with an energy disruptor. The weapon was designed for maximum pain, slowly disintegrating the victim's molecular structure while keeping them conscious until the very end. It would take exactly 10 minutes for Marcus to die, and every second would be agony. As the guards forced Marcus to his knees before the device, news feeds across the galaxy provided commentary. On Kepler Station, the insectoid hive queen clicked her mandibles in approval. "Finally, the humans will learn their place," she transmitted to her subjects. On the water world of Aquatica, the dolphin-like Cetans sang songs of celebration in their underwater cities. But on a distant asteroid mining facility on the edge of the void, someone else was watching. The figure sat in absolute darkness, surrounded by screens showing the execution from dozens of angles. Only his eyes were visible in the gloom, cold and calculating as they studied every detail of the platform, every guard position, every possible angle of approach. The man's fingers moved across a holographic keyboard, accessing databases that officially didn't exist. Within seconds, he had the location coordinates of every Zephyrian military installation within 50 light-years. His neural implant, far more advanced than anything the Galactic Council possessed, began calculating trajectories and timing. When Marcus had been captured 3 weeks ago, the galaxy had celebrated. The boy was the son of the most feared human in known space, though few realized the connection. Marcus had taken his mother's name, Chen, to avoid the legacy of his father. But blood runs deeper than names, and genetics run deeper than good intentions. The figure in the darkness smiled, though there was no warmth in the expression. He opened a communication channel on a frequency that had been dark for over a decade. The message was simple, transmitted in an ancient human language that predated galactic contact. "The pack is hungry," he said in perfect Russian. "Time to feed." Across human space, receivers that had been silent for years suddenly crackled to life. In the depths of asteroid belts, hidden bases began powering up systems that had been dormant. Ships that existed in no official registry started their engines. Men and women who had been living quiet lives under assumed identities checked weapons they had hoped never to use again. On the execution platform, Vexitar was enjoying his moment of triumph. The energy disruptor was charging, its low hum building to an ominous crescendo. Marcus remained on his knees, his head held high despite the fear in his eyes. He was young, barely more than a child. But he faced death with the courage that seemed bred into his species. "Any last words, human?" Vextar asked mockingly. Marcus looked directly into the nearest camera, his voice steady despite his circumstances. "My father is coming," he said simply. And when he arrives, you'll understand why they call him Baba Yaga." The Zephyrian commander laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the platform. "Your father is a myth, boy. A boogeyman story that humans tell their children. There is no Baba Yaga." In the asteroid belt, the figure in the darkness stood up. The screens around him showed his reflection for the first time, revealing a man in his 50s with graying hair and scars that told stories of 1,000 battles. His eyes held depths of experience that few beings in the galaxy could claim. Those who had seen those eyes and lived were few, and they never forgot them. He walked to a wall panel and placed his palm against it. Ancient biometric scanners confirmed his identity, and hidden doors slid open to reveal an armory that would make a galactic dreadnought jealous. But he passed by the exotic weapons, the plasma cannons, and gravity bombs. Instead, he selected items that seemed almost primitive by comparison. A simple black tactical suit, ceramic body armor, and from a special case, a pair of matched pistols that looked like antiques but hummed with barely contained energy. As he dressed, automated systems throughout the facility began their work. The asteroid itself was not what it appeared to be. Hidden beneath its rocky exterior was a ship unlike anything in the known galaxy, human engineering at its finest, built with technology that the Galactic Council had banned centuries ago. It had been waiting here for over 15 years, maintained by AI systems and ready for the day that would hopefully never come. That day had arrived. The energy disruptor reached full charge, its crystalline core pulsing with lethal energy. Marcus could feel the heat radiating from the weapon as Commander Vexitar placed his clawed hand on the activation control. The Zephyrian's 4 eyes gleamed with anticipation as he prepared to make history by executing the first human in galactic custody. "Farewell, terrorist," Vexitar said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "May your death serve as a warning to all humans who dare defy the natural order." The commander's finger moved toward the trigger, but he paused as his communication implant chimed urgently. The message was from his ship's sensor officer, and the priority level made his blood run cold. "Sir?" The panicked voice crackled through his neural link. "We're detecting massive gravitational distortions in the outer system. Something big is coming out of hyperspace." Vexitar's eyes narrowed as he accessed the sensor data through his implant. What he saw made no sense. The readings showed a ship larger than anything in the Zephyrian fleet, moving at speeds that should have been impossible. But more disturbing was the energy signature. It was completely unknown, unlike any propulsion system in the galactic databases. "All ships to defensive positions," he commanded through his neural link. "Maintain execution protocols." "This changes nothing." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. The mysterious ship was still 3 hours away at current velocity, but something about the sensor readings filled him with unease. The energy patterns were too clean, too precise. This wasn't some ramshackle human smuggler or desperate rescue attempt. This was something far more dangerous. On the platform below, Marcus had heard the exchange through the guard's open communication channels. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth despite the weapon pointed at his head. He had grown up hearing stories about his father's legendary status, but he had never truly believed them. They seemed too incredible, too much like fairy tales. Now, feeling the tremor of fear in his captors' voices, he began to understand that the stories might have been understated. Commander Vexitar shook off his unease and returned his attention to the execution. Whatever was coming, it would arrive too late to save the boy. The galaxy would see human weakness as Marcus Chen died screaming, and any rescue attempt would only result in more human deaths. It was a perfect scenario. "Resume broadcast to all networks," he ordered. "Let the galaxy watch as human arrogance meets galactic justice." 3 hours seemed like an eternity as the mysterious ship approached. The Zephyrian fleet had taken defensive positions around New Centauri, their weapons trained on the approaching vessel. Admiral Korth, commanding the System Defense Force from his flagship, studied the sensor readings with growing concern. "It's definitely human in origin," his tactical officer reported, "but the design is unlike anything in our databases. The energy output suggests weapons and shields far beyond current human technology." "Impossible," Admiral Korth replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Humans are primitives. They barely mastered interstellar travel 50 years ago." But as the ship drew closer, even the most skeptical Zephyrian officers began to question their assumptions about human capabilities. The vessel was a work of art, its black hull seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, giving it an almost organic appearance. Most unsettling of all, it moved with a grace that defied its massive size, sliding through space like a predator stalking its prey. When the ship finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, the collective gasp from billions of viewers was audible across the galaxy. The vessel was enormous, easily twice the size of a Zephyrian dreadnought. But its design was elegant rather than bulky. It looked like something from another age, when shipbuilders were artists as well as engineers. The communication channels suddenly filled with overlapping signals, as every military force in the system tried to contact the mysterious ship. Demands for identification, threats of destruction, and panicked status reports created a chaos of voices. But the black ship remained silent, gliding inexorably toward New Centauri like a force of nature. Admiral Korth decided to take direct action. All ships target the unknown vessel. Fire on my command. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons, particle beams, and quantum torpedoes lit up the space around the black ship in a dazzling display of destructive power. The combined firepower was enough to vaporize a small moon, and the viewers watching the execution broadcast held their breath as the energy weapons struck their target. The black ship emerged from the barrage completely undamaged. Its hull showed no signs of impact, no scorch marks or damage indicators. It was as if the most powerful weapons in the Zephyrian arsenal had simply ceased to exist when they touched the mysterious vessel. Impossible, Admiral Korth whispered, his confidence crumbling. Nothing can withstand that much firepower. The black ship's response was swift and precise. Beams of coherent energy lanced out from hidden weapon ports, each one finding its target with surgical accuracy. The beams didn't destroy the Zephyrian ships, they simply shut them down. Engines went dead, weapons powered down, and life support systems switched to emergency backup. In less than 30 seconds, the entire system defense fleet was helpless, floating dead in space. On the execution platform, Commander Vexitar watched the destruction of his fleet with growing horror. His hands shook as he tried to contact Admiral Korth but received only static in response. The mighty Zephyrian military, the force that had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved entire species, had been neutralized without a single casualty. "Sir," one of his guards whispered, "perhaps we should reconsider the execution. If that ship is here for the boy..." Vexitar struck the guard across the face with savage fury. "We will not be intimidated by human tricks. Execute the prisoner now!" But as he reached for the activation control, every screen on the platform flickered and went dark. When they came back online, they showed a single image that made the Zephyrian commander's blood freeze in his veins. A man sat in what appeared to be the bridge of the black ship. He was unremarkable at first glance, just a middle-aged human with graying hair and tired eyes. But there was something in those eyes that spoke of experiences beyond normal comprehension. They held the weight of decisions that had shaped the fate of worlds, and the cold certainty of someone who had never failed to keep a promise. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and conversational, but it carried across every communication channel in the system with perfect clarity. "My name is John Wick," he said simply. "You took my son." The silence that followed John Wick's words was absolute. Across the galaxy, billions of beings stared at their screens in stunned disbelief. The name meant nothing to most of them, but something in the man's quiet tone sent chills down the spines of every creature watching. This wasn't a desperate father making empty threats. This was a statement of fact delivered with the certainty of natural law. Commander Vexitar found his voice first, though it cracked with barely controlled fear. "You dare threaten the Galactic Council? Your son is a terrorist who will die for his crimes against civilization." John's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A coldness that had been absent for 15 years returned, like winter settling over a peaceful valley. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made the very air seem heavier. "Marcus freed enslaved children from your labor camps. If that makes him a terrorist in your eyes, then perhaps your civilization needs to be reconsidered." The cameras on the execution platform zoomed in on Marcus, showing the boy's battered but defiant face to the galaxy. The resemblance between father and son was unmistakable now that viewers knew what to look for. The same steady gaze, the same quiet strength that refused to break even in the face of certain death. "The boy destroyed our property," Vextar snarled, his composure slipping. "3 mining stations worth billions of credits. He will pay for that crime with his life." "Those stations were rebuilt within 6 months," John replied calmly. "But the children Marcus saved will remember their freedom for the rest of their lives. Tell me, Commander, which do you think has more value?" Admiral Korth's flagship suddenly crackled back to life as emergency power was restored. The Admiral's panicked voice cut across the communication channels. "This is Admiral Korth of the Zephyrian Defense Force. You will stand down immediately and surrender yourself for prosecution. You are outnumbered 300 to 1. John leaned back in his command chair, and for the first time, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was not a pleasant expression. "Admiral," he said quietly, "you're thinking like a Zephyrian. You see numbers and think they represent strength. But you've never faced someone who learned to fight among the asteroids of the Outer Rim, where every ship you lose means someone's children go hungry." The black ship suddenly accelerated, moving faster than anything its size should have been able to move. But instead of heading directly for New Centauri, it began a complex spiral pattern through the outer system. Admiral Korth ordered his remaining functional ships to intercept, but they might as well have tried to catch a shadow. "You see," John continued, his voice still conversational as his ship danced between plasma cannon volleys. 15 years ago, I made a promise to my wife. I promised her that I would never again be the man I was during the colony wars. I kept that promise. I became a husband, a father, a simple miner on a frontier world. I was happy." The black ship suddenly reversed direction, its impossible maneuvers making the pursuing Zephyrian vessels look clumsy and slow. 2 more defense ships went dark as precisely targeted energy beams disabled their core systems. "But you took my son." John's voice grew colder. "You tortured him. You put him on display like an animal. And now you plan to murder him while the galaxy watches for entertainment." Commander Vextar was sweating now, the purple fluid beading on his elongated skull. His hand hovered over the execution device's activation control, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the way the human spoke with such absolute certainty. Perhaps it was the growing realization that everything the Galactic Council believed about human capabilities was wrong. "Your threats mean nothing," Vextar said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You're one ship against an entire system. Even if you somehow reach the platform, you'll be too late. The boy dies in 10 minutes. 9 minutes and 37 seconds, actually," John corrected. "I've been timing it." On screens across the galaxy, tactical displays showed the impossible chase taking place in New Centauri's outer system. The black ship moved like a living thing, flowing between asteroids and space debris with inhuman grace. Every shot the Zephyrian fleet fired seemed to miss by inches, while return fire from the mysterious vessel was devastatingly accurate. But what truly terrified the watching aliens was not the ship's capabilities, but the man commanding it. John Wick sat motionless in his command chair, his hands never touching any controls. The ship responded to his thoughts through neural interfaces that were decades ahead of anything in galactic databases. Man and machine moved as one entity, a fusion of human intuition and artificial precision that created something entirely new. "You want to know who I am?" John asked, his voice cutting through the chaos of battle communications. "I was the man they sent to kill the boogeyman. I was the weapon that ended the colony wars. For 20 years, I was the shadow that kept human space safe from threats you can't imagine." Another Zephyrian ship went dark, its crew rescued by automated systems before they could suffocate in the vacuum of space. John's war was not with innocent soldiers following orders, but with the system that made those orders necessary. "But I gave that up for love," he continued. "I chose peace over power, family over fear. My wife helped me become human again. She gave me a son who inherited the best parts of both of us. Marcus has his mother's compassion and his father's will. When he saw children suffering, he acted. That's not terrorism, Commander. That's heroism." The tactical display showed that the black ship was now only minutes away from New Centauri's orbital defense perimeter. The remaining Zephyrian vessels had formed a desperate blockade, but their weapons had proven useless against the mysterious vessel's defenses. Last chance, human. Vextar screamed, his composure completely shattered. Surrender now or watch your son die. John's reply was soft, but it carried across every communication channel in the system with perfect clarity. Commander, you've made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because I chose peace I had forgotten how to wage war. You forgot that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that chooses not to hunt. The black ship suddenly shed its elegant movement patterns and accelerated directly toward the planet. It tore through the Zephyrian blockade like tissue paper, its impossible speed making defensive fire academic. In less than 3 minutes, it would reach New Centauri's atmosphere. But you took my son, John whispered. And in those words, the galaxy heard the sound of its nightmares coming true. Now you get to remember why they used to call me Baba Yaga. The black ship hit New Centauri's atmosphere like a meteor, its hull glowing white-hot from atmospheric friction. But instead of burning up like any normal vessel would, strange energy fields around the ship converted the heat into propulsion, actually accelerating as it dove toward the planet's surface. The impossible physics display left the galaxy's top scientists scrambling to understand what they were witnessing. Commander Vextar watched the approaching ship on his tactical display, his hand frozen over the execution device's trigger. Every instinct screamed at him to activate the weapon and end this nightmare. But something deeper held him back. Perhaps it was the growing realization that he had stepped into something far beyond his understanding. 2 minutes to impact, his tactical officer reported, his voice barely a whisper. Sir, recommend immediate evacuation of the platform. No, Vextar snarled, though sweat poured down his face. We finish this. The galaxy will see that humans bleed just like anyone else. But as he reached for the activation control again, his personal communicator chimed with an incoming message on a priority channel. The sender was High Chancellor Mordak, the supreme leader of the Zephyrian Empire, and one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Vextar. The Chancellor's voice carried an urgency that made the commander's blood run cold. Abort the execution immediately. That ship, that man, I know who he is. Chancellor? Vextar's voice cracked. Sir, the human is just one man. Surely our forces can handle a single enemy. You fool. Mordak's voice rose to a roar. That's not just any human. The energy signature of that ship, the tactical patterns, I've seen them before. 20 years ago, during the final battle of the Colony Wars, something similar appeared in the Kepler system. It destroyed an entire hegemony fleet in less than an hour. On the execution platform, Marcus lifted his head to watch his father's ship streak across the sky. The boy's face showed no fear now, only pride. He had grown up hearing whispered stories about the legendary warrior who had saved human civilization, but he had never imagined that man was his own father. The reports were classified, Chancellor Mordak continued, his voice heavy with old fear, but I was there commanding the Third Fleet. We watched something tear through enemy positions like they were made of paper. The survivors called it the ghost ship of the Outer Rim. They said it was piloted by a man who couldn't be killed, who fought like something from humanity's darkest myths. The black ship suddenly shifted course, abandoning its direct approach for a complex series of evasive maneuvers. The planet's orbital defense platforms opened fire, their massive cannons tracking the vessel's movement. But every shot missed by impossible margins, as if the ship knew exactly where each blast would be before the gunners pulled their triggers. But that was 20 years ago, Vextar protested weakly. The man would be old now, past his prime. Age means nothing to someone like that, the Chancellor replied. Stand down immediately. That's an order. But Vextar's pride had taken too much damage to allow for retreat now. He cut the communication link and turned to his guards. Prepare for combat landing, he ordered. If the human wants his son, he'll have to go through us to get him. The black ship was now only 30 seconds from the execution platform, its approach angle defying several laws of physics. As it drew closer, details became visible that made the watching galaxy gasp in recognition. The hull wasn't just black, it was covered in a pattern of microscopic engravings, names, thousands upon thousands of names in dozens of languages, each one representing someone who had died under John Wick's protection during the Colony Wars. Do you see now? John's voice cut through the communication channels one final time. Every name on my ship represents someone I failed to save. Children, families, entire colonies that were destroyed while I was fighting elsewhere. I carry their memory with me always, a reminder of the cost of being too late. The ship suddenly decelerated, its impossible engineering allowing it to stop dead in space just above the execution platform. But instead of landing or deploying weapons, it simply hovered there, silent and menacing. "But I won't be too late for my son," John continued. "Marcus, can you hear me?" The boy looked up at the ship hovering overhead, tears streaming down his face. "I hear you, Dad. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." John's voice was gentle now, filled with the love of a father for his child. "But I want you to know something. What you did freeing those children, that took real courage. Your mother would be proud." Commander Vextar screamed in rage and slammed his hand down on the execution device's activation control. The weapon hummed to life, its energy discharge building toward lethal levels. But as the deadly beam began to form, something impossible happened. The air around Marcus shimmered, and suddenly he was no longer kneeling on the platform. Instead, he stood beside his father on the bridge of the black ship, his shackles mysteriously gone. The energy beam fired harmlessly into empty space where the boy had been just seconds before. Teleportation. Someone whispered across the communication channels, but that technology doesn't exist. On the ship's bridge, Marcus stared around in wonder at displays and controls that seemed like magic. His father's gentle hand rested on his shoulder, offering comfort and strength. "How?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with awe. "Your mother was more than just a frontier colonist," John replied softly. "She was a scientist who worked on projects that officially never existed. This ship, those weapons, even the technology that just saved you, she helped design them all. She believed that humans needed to be ready for threats the galaxy couldn't imagine." The execution platform below erupted in chaos as Zephyrian guards fired wildly at the hovering ship. Their weapons had no more effect than the space fleets had, the energy beams simply disappearing when they struck the vessel's hull. "She was right," John continued, his voice hardening as he looked down at the aliens who had tortured his son. "The galaxy sees humans as primitive, violent, dangerous. They think we're animals that need to be controlled, but they don't understand what we really are." Marcus looked at his father with new understanding. "What are we, Dad?" John smiled, and for a moment he looked like any ordinary father sharing wisdom with his child. "We're the species that survived the asteroid impacts and ice ages on Earth. We're the ones who looked at the vacuum of space and saw it as just another frontier to conquer. We're the people who never learned to give up, no matter how impossible the odds." The black ship began to move again, but not away from the planet. Instead, it descended toward the capital city, its shadow falling across millions of Zephyrian citizens who looked up in terror and wonder. "And now," John's voice carried across every communication channel in the system, reaching the ears of beings on 1,000 different worlds, "you're going to learn why the galaxy's nightmares have human faces." The black ship's sensors suddenly activated, scanning every database in the Zephyrian network with impossible speed. Within minutes, John had accessed classified files that revealed the true scope of the forced labor operations. Thousands of children across dozens of worlds, all working in conditions that would make hardened criminals weep. "The files are being transmitted to every news network in the galaxy," John announced. "The Council can deny the existence of slave labor all they want, but the evidence is now public record." Panic erupted across alien space as the classified documents flooded communication networks. Government officials scrambled to contain the damage, but the information spread faster than they could suppress it. Images of child laborers, financial records showing profits from forced work, and correspondence between council members discussing the expendable workforce painted a picture of systematic cruelty. "You see," John continued, his voice cutting through the chaos, "humans have always been very good at one particular thing. We remember. Every injustice, every cruelty, every time someone hurt the innocent. We remember, and eventually we act." On a dozen worlds, human ships began emerging from hidden bases, not the crude vessels the galaxy expected, but sleek predators built with technology that made current military hardware look like stone axes. They moved with the same impossible grace as John's ship. Their crews veterans of conflicts the official histories claimed never happened. "The difference between humans and every other species in this galaxy is simple," John explained as his reinforcements took positions throughout known space. When you see suffering, you calculate the cost of intervention. When we see suffering, we calculate the cost of doing nothing. Commander Vexistar watched in horror as reports flooded in from across Zephyrian space. Human ships were appearing at mining operations, labor camps, and factory worlds, but they weren't attacking. Instead, they were simply positioning themselves in orbit, their weapons powered but not aimed. The message was clear without a word being spoken. 46 hours and 37 minutes remaining, John announced calmly. I suggest you use the time wisely. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the most powerful military forces in known space found themselves completely outmaneuvered by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The humans hadn't won through superior firepower or advanced technology alone. They had won by being willing to do what no one else would do, risk everything to save people they had never met. My son is safe now, John said, his hand resting protectively on Marcus's shoulder. But there are thousands of other children who aren't. 46 hours, Council. Choose wisely. Ship settled into a stationary hover above New Centauri's capital city, its massive form casting shadows across the crystalline spires below. But John Wick made no move to attack. Instead, he opened communication channels to every government, news network, and civilian receiver in the galaxy. What followed was not the rampage that everyone expected, but something far more terrifying to those in power. My name is John Wick, he began, his calm voice reaching billions of ears across known space. 15 years ago, I disappeared from galactic affairs because I chose love over war. But recent events have reminded me that sometimes peace can only be maintained by those willing to fight for it. On the execution platform, Commander Vextar scrambled to evacuate his forces, but his transport ships had been disabled along with the rest of the fleet. He was trapped, watching helplessly as the human he had tortured was reunited with the most dangerous man in the galaxy. The Galactic Council would have you believe that humans are a young species, barely evolved beyond primitive barbarism, John continued. They point to our conflicts, our territorial disputes, our tendency toward violence as proof of our inferiority. But they misunderstand what they see. Across the galaxy, alien leaders listened with growing unease. This wasn't the angry rant of a grieving father. This was something far more calculated and dangerous. Human aggression isn't a flaw in our nature, John explained. It's a feature. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. Predators, natural disasters, disease, ice ages that wiped out entire ecosystems. We survived all of it, not by being peaceful, but by being the most dangerous thing on our planet. The ship's external cameras zoomed in on the execution platform, showing Commander Vextar's terrified face to the watching galaxy. But John's attention wasn't focused on revenge. Instead, he was building something far more powerful than any weapon. But here's what the Council doesn't understand about human nature, he continued. We don't fight because we enjoy violence. We fight because we can't stand to see the innocent suffer. Every human conflict in our history started because someone was hurting people who couldn't defend themselves. On screens across 1,000 worlds, archived footage began playing. Images of Marcus freeing the enslaved children from the Zephyrian labor camps. Video of human rescue workers saving alien civilians from natural disasters. Records of human peacekeepers stopping genocides on worlds the Council had written off as lost causes. My son Marcus saw children being worked to death in your mines. John's voice grew harder. He couldn't stand by and do nothing, even though he knew the consequences. That's not terrorism. That's what humans call heroism. In the Galactic Council chambers on Centaurus Prime, emergency sessions were being called as representatives watched the broadcast with growing alarm. They had built their power structure on the assumption that humans could be controlled through superior force and technology. But the black ship hovering over New Centauri proved that assumption was fatally flawed. For 20 years, I kept the peace in human space by being very good at war, John explained. I was the weapon that prevented conflicts before they could start. When pirates raided human colonies, I made them disappear. When alien powers tested our borders, I reminded them why that was a bad idea. I was very good at my job. The ship's weapons system suddenly came online, though they remained targeted at empty space. Energy readings spiked to levels that made every military officer in the system reach for their emergency protocols. But the demonstration lasted only seconds before the weapons powered down again. But I gave that up for love. John's voice softened momentarily. My wife helped me understand that there was more to life than being the galaxy's nightmare. She taught me that the strongest man is the one who chooses not to fight. So I became a father, a husband, a simple miner on a frontier world. Marcus stood beside his father on the bridge, finally understanding the weight his father had carried all these years. The legendary Baba Yaga wasn't a monster. He was a man who had sacrificed his own peace of mind to protect others. But you couldn't leave us alone. John's voice turned cold again. You took my son. You tortured him. You put him on display for the galaxy's entertainment. You forced me to remember who I used to be. Commander Vextar tried one last desperate gambit, opening a communication channel to the ship. What do you want, human? Money? Territory? Name your price. John's response was swift and final. I want the children. What children? Vextar asked, though he already knew the answer. All of them, John replied. Every enslaved child in Zephyrian space. Every forced laborer in the mines. Every young being torn from their families to work in your factories. You have 48 hours to begin their release. The demand sent shockwaves through the galactic communication networks. Slave labor was the foundation of several alien economies, though it was officially denied. John's ultimatum threatened to expose the dirty secret that kept the Council's member worlds prosperous. And if we refuse? Vextar asked weakly. John was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then I stopped being a father trying to save his son, and go back to being the thing that ends wars. The galaxy will remember why humans don't fight fair, why we never surrender, and why the most dangerous predator is always the one that chooses mercy right up until the moment they don't. The Black. 36 hours after John Wick's ultimatum, the galaxy watched as the impossible became reality. On screens across 1,000 worlds, transport ships lifted off from mining colonies, factory worlds, and agricultural stations. Their cargo holds were filled not with resources or manufactured goods, but with children, thousands upon thousands of young beings from dozens of species, all being returned to families they hadn't seen in years. The Galactic Council had tried to resist for the first 12 hours. Emergency sessions were called, military forces were mobilized, and threats were issued through every diplomatic channel. But one by one, the member worlds began to crack under the pressure. The evidence of systematic child slavery was undeniable, and the human ships positioned throughout their territory made the cost of continued defiance clear. High Chancellor Mordak himself had finally broken the deadlock, ordering the immediate release of all forced laborers under the age of majority. His decision came after a private communication with John Wick that left the Chancellor pale and shaking. The contents of that conversation would remain classified forever, but those present noted that Mordak never again spoke of humans as primitives. On the bridge of the Black Ship, Marcus watched the liberation effort with tears streaming down his face. These were the children he had tried to save, the innocent victims whose suffering had driven him to acts of desperate heroism. Now they were going home, and the galaxy would never again be able to pretend that their suffering didn't exist. How did you know? Marcus asked his father. How did you know they would surrender without a fight? John smiled, and for the first time in days it reached his eyes. Because I understand something about power that most people don't. Real strength isn't about how much damage you can do. It's about how much damage you're willing to take to protect others. The liberation ships were escorted by human vessels, their crews ensuring that no accidents befell the precious cargo. Each transport was monitored by AI systems more advanced than anything in galactic databases, making any attempt at sabotage impossible. The Council could have fought us, John continued. They have more ships, more weapons, more resources, but they also have more to lose. Their entire civilization is built on exploitation and control. When someone threatens the foundation of that system, they fold like a house of cards. Commander Vextar had been among the first officials arrested by his own government. The Zephyrian leadership needed scapegoats for the scandal, and the commander who had tortured a human child on live galactic television was the perfect candidate. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, a reminder of what happened when someone mistook human compassion for weakness. The execution platform still floated above New Centauri, but now it served a different purpose. Human engineers had converted the structure into a memorial, its crystalline surface etched with the names of every child who had died in the labor camps. The galaxy's attempt to break human spirit had instead created a monument to human determination. "What happens now?" Marcus asked as they watched the last of the liberation ships disappear into hyperspace. "Now we go home," John replied. "The frontier world where your mother and I built our life together. Where I can teach you to be both strong enough to fight and wise enough to know when not to." But as the black ship prepared to depart, John opened one final communication to the galaxy. His words would be recorded in history books and studied by scholars for generations to come. "Today you learned something important about humanity," he began. "We don't seek conflict, but we will not run from it. We don't want to rule the galaxy, but we will not allow others to rule through cruelty. We are not perfect, but we are stubborn enough to keep trying to be better." On 1,000 worlds, beings who had witnessed the events of the past 2 days would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. They had seen a single human father move the galaxy itself to save his son, and thousands of children he had never met. "We are the species that looks at the impossible and calls it Tuesday," John continued. "We are the ones who turn fairy tales into reality through sheer bloody-minded determination. We are the children of Earth, and we do not abandon our own." The black ship began its departure, but not before one final gesture. The vessel's hull shimmered, and suddenly the names etched into its surface began to glow. Each one represented a life that John Wick had failed to save during the colony wars, but now their memory had helped save thousands of others. "The galaxy has a choice to make," John concluded. "You can see humans as a threat to be contained or as allies to be respected. But remember this day when you decide. Remember that we are the species that keeps our promises, especially the ones that seem impossible to keep." As the ship disappeared into hyperspace, heading for the frontier world that John Wick called home, the galaxy was left to contemplate a new reality. Humanity was not the primitive species they had believed. They were something far more dangerous and far more wonderful. They were the ones who would cross any distance, fight any enemy, and pay any price to protect the innocent. And in the years that followed, as the galaxy struggled to rebuild its moral foundation, children across 1,000 worlds would fall asleep to bedtime stories about the father who moved the stars themselves to save his son. But those who knew the truth understood that it wasn't magic or technology that had changed everything. It was love. The simple, implacable love of a father for his child, multiplied by a species that had never learned to accept that some things couldn't be fixed. The galaxy would never be the same. And perhaps for the first time in its history, that was exactly what it needed.